Let's dissect the careers of National Football League players whose legends have outgrown their actual performance. We'll begin with Odell Beckham. OBJ stormed into the league back in 2014 after the Giants selected him 12th overall. Despite sitting out 4 contests, he dismantled defenses, pulling in 91 catches for 1,035 yards and 12 touchdowns. That initial campaign netted him Offensive Rookie of the Year, making him the only rookie receiver to ever secure 90 receptions and double-digit touchdowns. It was also the season of the catch. That unbelievable one-handed reception against Dallas. The subsequent 2 years demonstrated it was no accident. In 2015, he put up 96 catches, 1,450 yards, and 13 touchdowns. He graced the Madden 16 cover, and in his 3rd year, he collected 101 receptions for 1,367 yards and 10 scores. During those initial 3 seasons, his yearly average was an astounding 96 receptions, 1,374 yards, and nearly 12 touchdowns. At just 24 years old, Beckham's production was eclipsing Jerry Rice's. His explosiveness, reliable hands, and signature hair captivated fans. A trip to Canton seemed like a foregone conclusion. But following those 3 phenomenal years, his career fell off a cliff. A fractured ankle held him to a mere 4 games in 2017. His last 1,000-yard performance was in Cleveland during the 2019 season, just a couple of years before the team released him. A brief stint with Los Angeles saw a flicker of the old magic during their Super Bowl victory, but he tore his ACL in that very championship game. After sitting out the 2022 season, he had forgettable tenures in Baltimore and Miami before being released in December 2024. His career concluded with 575 catches for 7,987 yards and 60 touchdowns over 10 seasons. Respectable, but a world away from his initial trajectory. It's the memory of those first 3 electrifying seasons that persists. Odell's legacy became more about the myth than the man. He's remembered not for the career he had, but for the one he was supposed to have. The exact same can be said for the most overrated player in National Football League history, Bo Jackson. He has an unbreakable grip on the 30 and over demographic, and I suspect they don't realize they've been conditioned by the Bo Knows marketing machine. Bo Jackson looked like a mythical creature playing a mortal's game. The 1985 Heisman Trophy winner was the first overall pick by Tampa Bay in 1986, but he chose a baseball career instead. The Raiders took a chance on him in the 7th round the next year, and Al Davis permitted him to be a 2-sport athlete, baseball season first, then football. In a 1987 Monday Night Football broadcast, Jackson famously ran over the trash-talking linebacker Brian Bosworth while racking up 221 yards, a record that still holds for that program. Across 4 seasons as a part-time player, he amassed 2,782 yards on 515 carries, an average of 5.4 yards per rush. He broke off 2 runs of 90-plus yards, the most in the history of the National Football League, with his 1989 season being his zenith, 950 yards, 5.5 yards per carry, and 4 touchdowns in just 11 games. His combination of blinding speed and raw power was intoxicating to fans. Then, January 13th, 1991 arrived. In a playoff game against Cincinnati, a routine tackle resulted in a dislocated hip for Jackson. That injury catastrophically cut off blood flow to his hip, ending his football career at the age of 28. He retired having played only 38 games, with 2,782 yards and 18 touchdowns. That's quite good for a hobbyist, but it's a footnote compared to his potential, and it pales in comparison to his Hall of Fame teammate at the same position, who we will get to later. The legend of Bo isn't rooted in his accomplishments. It's rooted in that brilliant but brief vision of what might have been the greatest athlete in history. And while we're on the subject of all-time great athletes, let's examine my personal favorite player ever, Michael Vick. I began following the National Football League around 2010 when Vick was with the Eagles, and he is the sole reason I am an Eagles fan to this day. I count myself lucky because I'm not sure I would have survived being a Falcons fan. That organization is a factory of pain and suffering. With that said, I must concede that we remember him as being better than he was, even if his peak was mind-bending. Michael Vick redefined the quarterback position with his running ability, but an honest look at his passing statistics reveals a much different narrative. As the first overall pick in 2001 from Virginia Tech, his electrifying style was simply undeniable. He made history as the first quarterback to eclipse 1,000 rushing yards in a season, ending his career with 6,109 rushing yards. But here's the part of the story that gets conveniently overlooked. Vick completed a mere 56% of his passes over his 13-year career. He passed for 133 touchdowns against 88 interceptions, earning him a pedestrian 80.0 passer rating. Those numbers do not align with the Hall of Fame trajectory that many claim he was on. His playoff record was just 2-3, with 0 appearances in the Super Bowl. In those playoff contests, he completed only 54% of his throws and never once managed a passer rating over 80. For the 2 playoff games he actually won, his combined passing total was a measly 199 yards. He did retire with 22,464 passing yards and 133 touchdowns over 143 games. Vick was appointment viewing and forever changed how we see mobile quarterbacks. The Michael Vick experience was a tangible phenomenon, but if you look past the highlight reels, you're left with a phenomenal runner who never matured into the polished pocket passer the position ultimately requires. The legend simply outran the reality. And another legendary player who provokes outrage when I label him as overrated is Reggie Bush. Now, let's be clear, Reggie Bush at USC is untouchable. His college legacy is cemented for all time. Reggie Bush in the National Football League, on the other hand, was profoundly average. Reggie Bush entered the pros as one of the most heralded prospects in history. The 2005 Heisman winner drew comparisons to legends like Marshall Faulk, Barry Sanders, and Gale Sayers. Those are Hall of Fame names for a talent considered a sure thing. The Saints drafted him 2nd overall in 2006, and the expectations were astronomical. But Bush never became that transcendent player. Over 11 seasons as a journeyman for 5 different teams, he ran for 5,490 yards on 1,286 carries, which works out to an average of 4.3 yards per attempt. He scraped together just 2 1,000-yard rushing seasons over his entire career. Those ankle-breaking displays of agility were few and far between. The bell cow durability simply wasn't there. Bush posted respectable receiving stats, 477 catches for 3,598 yards, but he was drafted to redefine the position, not to become a glorified third down specialist. His resume is conspicuously empty. 0 Pro Bowls, and he never topped the league in any meaningful category. His final career numbers are thoroughly average. 5,490 rushing yards, 36 rushing touchdowns, and 58 total scores. Those are perfectly fine stats for a role player, but an absolute catastrophe for a 2nd overall draft pick. Bush was a human highlight reel in college, but the NFL exposed the fact that he was not a franchise-altering bell cow. The hype machine convinced you he was destined for greatness in the league, and it just never happened. His public relations, however, remains elite to this day. And speaking of a player with elite PR, we have another one in Christian Okoye. Christian Okoye secured his moniker, the Nigerian Nightmare, by plowing through defenders as if he were a freight train. The Chiefs selected him in the 2nd round back in 1987, and at 6'1", 260 pounds with a 4.440, he was a physical specimen. The man was genuinely terrifying. His 1989 season was his magnum opus, leading the NFL with 370 carries for 1,480 yards and becoming the first Chief ever to lead the league in rushing. He took home AFC Offensive Player of the Year and appeared completely unstoppable. There was, however, one significant catch. Okoye didn't even begin playing football until he was 23. He was a track athlete who only switched sports because Nigeria snubbed him for the Olympics, and that raw inexperience was always apparent. By 1992, injuries had ravaged his knees, forcing his retirement at age 31 after only 6 seasons. That infamous Steve Atwater hit seemed to break him. He concluded his career with a mere 4,897 yards and 40 touchdowns. He was a dominant force when healthy, but the punishing physical toll ultimately broke him. One incredible season, another decent one, and then he was gone. The Nightmare was brilliant but faded quickly. And speaking of burning out fast, let's discuss Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell collected 3 Pro Bowl appearances and 2 first-team All-Pro honors, making him look like the most complete running back in the entire league. As the 48th overall pick in 2013, Bell was a dominant force in Pittsburgh. His 2014 season was nothing short of brilliant, amassing 2,215 yards from scrimmage. His 2017 campaign piled up 1,946 yards from 406 touches, all while displaying his signature patient running style and elite pass-catching skills. But Bell sat out the entire 2018 season over a massive contract dispute, and his career immediately nosedived afterward. He inked a deal with the Jets for $52.5 million and proceeded to average a pitiful 3.2 yards per carry in 2019. He then became a journeyman, bouncing between Kansas City, Baltimore, and Tampa Bay as a backup, making virtually no impact. Across 8 seasons, Bell rushed for 6,554 yards with a 4.1 average, a mediocre efficiency rating masked by high volume. People fixate on his dominance in Pittsburgh, conveniently forgetting that he quit on the Steelers only to become a total non-factor. Bell was an elite player for 3 years, and then he was washed up at 27. His holdout utterly torpedoed his legacy. Now, another player whose off-field actions damaged his career was Colin Kaepernick, though perhaps not in the way you assume. For some baffling reason, this man was still getting team workouts as late as 2022, which is just mind-boggling. Colin Kaepernick exploded onto the scene in 2012 after stepping in for an injured Alex Smith, proceeding to lead the 49ers all the way to the Super Bowl. His playoff debut remains the stuff of legend. Facing Green Bay, he threw for 263 yards and rushed for another 181, which is still a record for any quarterback. In the Super Bowl loss, he passed for 302 yards. And then the bubble burst. His completion percentage plunged from 62% to 58%, highlighting his issues with accuracy. Defenses figured him out, and by 2014, the 49ers had stumbled to an 8-8 record. By 2015, he had been benched for Blaine Gabbert. Across 6 seasons, he tallied 12,271 passing yards, 72 touchdowns against 30 interceptions, and an 89 passer rating. These are respectable numbers for a game manager, but not for a franchise quarterback. Kaepernick excelled within Jim Harbaugh's system, supported by a world-class defense that concealed his weaknesses. Once that structure crumbled, so did his performance. He delivered 2 incredible playoff runs, and then he was finished. The protests became the story, but they overshadowed a decline that was already well underway. We have a string of Cowboys players coming up, and I suspect that because they played for America's team, we remember them more favorably than their careers actually warrant. Let's start with Dez Bryant. Now, I might have a slight bias here, because I used to work at Best Buy, and he came in during one of my shifts back when he was with Baltimore. He told me he'd take a picture after grabbing something from his car, and I never laid eyes on him again. So, consider this my payback. Dez Bryant wore number 88, the same iconic number as Cowboys legends Michael Irvin and Drew Pearson. And for a short while, he lived up to that legacy. From 2012 to 2014, Bryant was an elite force. During that stretch, he averaged 91 receptions, 1,312 yards, and 13 touchdowns. In 2014, he topped the NFL with 16 receiving touchdowns and was named a first-team All-Pro. With Tony Romo tossing him jump balls, he was simply unguardable. But then the foot injury struck in 2015. Bryant was never the same player again. By 2016, with Dak at the helm instead of Romo, his output plummeted to just 50 catches for 796 yards. Between 2012 and 2014, he averaged nearly 10 deep receptions per season. In 2017, he had only 1. He made 3 Pro Bowls and was cut in 2018 at the age of 29. Brief stints in New Orleans and Baltimore amounted to nothing. Dez gave us a few phenomenal years, and that was essentially it. Next up is the quarterback who was throwing to Dez for most of that time, Tony Romo. Tony Romo occupies a strange space in football history. When he retired, the general consensus was that he was a pretty good, but not great quarterback. Then, he immediately became a sensation as a broadcaster, which seemed to retroactively inflate the perception of his playing days. Now, public opinion has soured on his broadcasting, yet somehow, people are defending his on-field performance even more fiercely. All that said, Tony Romo's journey to the NFL began as an undrafted free agent from Eastern Illinois, and he clawed his way up from holding a clipboard to becoming the starting quarterback for Dallas. When he was finally given a chance in 2006, Romo looked like a revelation. He passed for nearly 3,000 yards in only 10 starts, which was enough to earn him his first Pro Bowl invitation. His peak performance occurred between 2007 and 2014, a period in which he earned 4 Pro Bowl selections and guided the Cowboys to several playoff berths. Romo's sandlot scrambling and late-game heroics endeared him to the masses, and his 2014 season was nothing short of brilliant. 34 touchdowns, a 113.2 passer rating, and a second-team All-Pro nod. The legend of Tony Romo, however, soon outgrew the reality. While his career stats were respectable 34,083 passing yards, 248 touchdowns, and a 97 passer rating, his postseason resume was abysmal. A 2-4 record, with no trips to the Super Bowl or even a conference title game. Speculation about what might have been has completely obscured the facts. Let's be clear, Romo was a solid quarterback, period. Nagging injuries cut his career short, and he hung up his cleats before ever even sniffing an NFC Championship game. Hindsight has romanticized him as some unsung hero, but the actual story is far less complicated. He was reliably decent, sometimes spectacular, but his performance never justified the myth built around him. And finishing off our look at these Cowboys is none other than Troy Aikman. Troy Aikman secured his place in history as a winner, leading the Cowboys to 3 Super Bowl victories. Taken with the number 1 pick in 1989, Aikman was a cornerstone of the Dallas dynasty, racking up 6 Pro Bowl appearances and a Super Bowl MVP award along the way. You could argue his peak statistical performance was in 1993, when he posted 3,100 yards, 15 touchdowns, and a 99 passer rating en route to yet another title. Take away the championship hardware, however, and Aikman's statistics reveal a much less impressive player. Across 12 seasons, he managed a meager 165 touchdowns against 141 interceptions, completing only 61% of his passes. The man never once threw for more than 3,500 yards in a single year and retired with an underwhelming 81 career passer rating. Aikman had the luxury of playing with Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, and one of the most dominant offensive lines in history. He played it safe and avoided errors, but his championship rings have inflated his reputation far beyond what his numbers warrant. He was simply a caretaker for a roster loaded with talent. And if we're talking about caretakers on loaded teams, let's turn to Terry Bradshaw. Bradshaw's 4 Super Bowl rings and 2 Super Bowl MVP trophies have made him an icon in Pittsburgh. Selected first overall in 1970, Bradshaw's early career was an absolute train wreck. His debut season is arguably the worst the league has ever seen, featuring a 30.4 passer rating with 6 touchdowns and a staggering 24 interceptions. His second year was hardly an improvement. He tossed 13 touchdowns against 22 interceptions for a 59.7 rating. Eventually, he stabilized, steering Pittsburgh to championships in 1974, 75, 78, and 79. His 1978 MVP season was his zenith, 28 touchdowns and a league-best 7.9 yards per throw. But the full scope of Bradshaw's career statistics is what's truly revealing. 27,989 passing yards, 212 touchdowns versus 210 interceptions, and a dismal 52% completion rate. He was quarterbacking what might be the most talented team ever put together. The Steel Curtain defense alone boasted 10 Hall of Famers. His peers, like Roger Staubach and Fran Tarkenton, had vastly superior efficiency numbers. Bradshaw made plays in big moments, no doubt, but he was hoisted to legendary status by an incredible supporting cast. And speaking of being carried, let's talk about William the Fridge Perry. He was essentially a one-hit wonder, followed by a lot of mediocrity. William Perry exploded into a national sensation with the 1985 Bears, but his celebrity dwarfed his on-field impact. A 335-pound defensive tackle, drafted 22nd overall from Clemson, Perry captivated the country when coach Mike Ditka started using him as a battering ram at fullback near the end zone. His first-year stats were respectable, 5 sacks and 2 fumble recoveries, while his moonlighting on offense resulted in 3 touchdowns, one of which came in the Super Bowl. Yet, his own defensive coordinator, Buddy Ryan, famously labeled Perry a wasted draft pick and kept him on the bench at first. In a 10-season NFL career, Perry accumulated just 29.5 sacks and 506 tackles. Decent numbers, but a far cry from the dominant force you'd expect from a first-round pick. He peaked in 1986 with another 5-sack season, but he never evolved into the top-tier pass rusher his draft status promised. The Fridge's gimmick concealed his shortcomings. In reality, he was a serviceable backup on one of the greatest defenses ever assembled. Still, his catchy nickname and larger-than-life persona made him more famous than several Hall of Fame teammates. The fridge was entertaining, but he was never exceptional. In that same vein, let's discuss two other entertaining but unexceptional players, Eli Manning and Philip Rivers, both of whom I suspect will inexplicably end up in the Hall of Fame. Manning at least has a couple of arguments in his favor, his family name and the fact he defeated the greatest of all time on two separate occasions. Drafted number 1 overall in 2004, Manning was a mainstay for the Giants for 16 seasons, making 234 straight starts. His entire career is defined by two miraculous playoff runs in 2007 and 2011. The helmet catch, the game-winning drives, and the upset victories are what built his legend. Look at Manning's regular season performance, however, and you'll see a starkly different narrative. He retired with a perfectly mediocre 117-117 starting record, 57,000 passing yards, 366 touchdowns against 244 interceptions, a 60% completion rate, and an 84 passer rating. He was selected to only 4 Pro Bowls, never earned an MVP award, and the only major statistical category he ever led the league in was interceptions. Manning tossed 27 picks in 2013 and 25 in 2010. In total, he threw more interceptions than anyone else in the league on 3 separate occasions. His play was frustratingly erratic, and he would often vanish for long stretches of a season. The only reason a Hall of Fame discussion even exists is because those 2 championship rings distract from his otherwise average career. There was never a single season where Manning could be considered a top 5 quarterback. He had 2 clutch postseasons and 14 years of being just average. He was a 5-100 quarterback whose reputation was artificially inflated by 2 unbelievable playoff runs and his famous surname. But the other quarterback I brought up, Philip Rivers, doesn't have the famous name and certainly doesn't have the miraculous postseason success. For 17 seasons, Philip Rivers played in the NFL, and not once did he ever make it to the Super Bowl. And yet, some people still argue he's a future Hall of Famer. He was the 4th overall selection back in 2004. When Philip Rivers took the reins in San Diego, he certainly turned heads, putting up 3,388 yards and 22 touchdowns his first year out of the gate. His apex was arguably between 2008 and 2013, a period where he collected Pro Bowl nods and posted what looked like elite statistics. In 2008, he hit 34 touchdowns with a 105 passer rating, which landed him 6th in the MVP race. By the time he hung it up, Rivers had amassed 63,440 yards, 421 touchdowns, and a 95.2 rating. These are staggering volume stats, the product of a long career. But let's look at the facts. He left the game with a starter record of 134-106 and a pathetic 5-7 in the playoffs, failing to ever get beyond the AFC Championship. He topped the league in interceptions on 2 separate occasions and had a knack for throwing game-ending picks when the pressure was highest. He consistently folded against Tom Brady, never secured an MVP award, failed to make a single first-team All-Pro, and helmed talented Chargers teams that were perennial underachievers. We're told to remember the fiery competitor and the gunslinger attitude, and his brief return this season was a nice bit of nostalgia. But the unvarnished truth is that Rivers was a very good quarterback for a very long time, who shrank when the moments were biggest, a resident of the Hall of Very Good, but miles away from Canton. Now let's pivot to a few running backs, starting with Marcus Allen. I know I touched on this before, arguing he was a superior talent to Bo Jackson, and he was. But that doesn't change the fact that his legacy benefits from some serious revisionist history. Marcus Allen secured both the 1985 MVP and a Super Bowl MVP, cementing his status as a Raiders icon. Drafted 10th overall in 1982, Allen was a force of nature as a rookie, compiling 1,098 total yards and 14 touchdowns in a strike-shortened season of just 9 games. His MVP campaign was utterly dominant, 2,314 yards from scrimmage and 14 scores, all while pacing the league in rushing with 1,759 yards. But after hitting that pinnacle, Allen's output fell off a cliff. Between 1986 and 1992, he averaged a paltry 680 rushing yards a season and never once broke the 800-yard mark in that entire span, thanks to his infamous feud with Al Davis that saw him buried on the bench. Allen retired with 12,243 rushing yards and 123 touchdowns across 16 seasons. These are figures propped up by sheer longevity, a result of him playing until he was 37. The reality is 3 elite years followed by a decade of mediocrity. Allen had a brief flash of greatness before devolving into a short yardage specialist. A single MVP season does not forge a legendary career, a lesson that applies equally to Shaun Alexander. Shaun Alexander grabbed the 2005 MVP on the back of an absurd season, 1,880 rushing yards, and a then NFL record of 27 touchdowns. The 19th pick in 2000, Alexander was a dominant force from 2001 to 2005, ripping off 5 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons and banking 3 Pro Bowl appearances. His 2005 season, as noted, was one for the history books, carrying Seattle to the Super Bowl and earning him first-team All-Pro honors. The problem? Alexander's entire success was built on the back of Steve Hutchinson and one of the most dominant offensive lines in football. The moment Hutchinson departed in 2006, Alexander's production disintegrated. He managed just 896 yards in 10 games, followed by 716 yards in 2007. By 2008, at age 31, he was out of the league. Across 9 seasons, Alexander compiled 9,453 yards and 100 touchdowns. Those are eye-popping totals that completely conceal his utter reliance on his blockers. He delivered one transcendent season, but we conveniently forget how fast he became irrelevant without elite protection. Alexander was the definition of a system player, not a generational force. Strip away that world-class blocking, and he was just another guy. Now, LeSean McCoy, or Shady, was far from ordinary. He collected 6 Pro Bowls and 2 first-team All-Pro nods, positioning him as one of the most celebrated backs of the 2010. He was the 53rd pick in 2009. McCoy's 2013 season was genuinely elite, 1,607 rushing yards and 2,146 yards from scrimmage as he won the league's rushing title. He backed that up with 1,319 yards in 2014, solidifying his reputation as an electrifying playmaker. But the moment he was traded from Philadelphia, McCoy's productivity took a nosedive. During his 4 years in Buffalo, he only surpassed the 1,200-yard mark once. He faded into a career as a role-playing backup for Kansas City and Tampa Bay, offering minimal contributions over his 12 seasons. McCoy retired with 11,102 rushing yards and a 4.5 yards per carry average. These are respectable figures, but they don't justify the hype. The legendary elusiveness of his peak was undeniable, but he was bounced from a starting role remarkably quickly. A couple of phenomenal seasons simply isn't the same as sustained greatness. And that brings us to our last subject, Joe Flacco. It's truly bizarre how people's memory of his career has been warped by the last couple of years. Joe Flacco is a Super Bowl champion and a Super Bowl MVP, the result of one of the most incredible postseason heaters ever. Taken 18th overall in 2008, Flacco reached the playoffs in his first 5 straight seasons, amassing a 10-5 postseason record over that time. His performance in the 2012 playoffs was the stuff of legends. 1,140 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions through 4 games. He looked completely invincible. But that magical run stands in stark contrast to the reality of his regular season career. Over 18 seasons, we're talking 48,776 yards, 272 touchdowns against 172 interceptions, and a pedestrian 84 passer rating. His record as a starter is a barely above average 107-94, with a single Pro Bowl to his name. After that Super Bowl, Baltimore handed him a $120 million contract, and his play immediately cratered. He threw 22 interceptions in 2013 with a miserable 73.1 passer rating. He's experienced a bit of a late career revival where he's been serviceable, and suddenly it seems everyone has collective amnesia about his dismal final seasons in Baltimore, followed by forgettable stints with the Broncos, Eagles, and Jets. Everyone clings to the Elite Dragon memes and that one unbelievable playoff streak, but to do so requires ignoring more than a decade of hard evidence pointing to his mediocrity. It's madness. So, that's the list. Players whose legacies have been inflated far beyond their actual on-field performance. Appreciate you watching, and hit subscribe if you're new.